No estamos solos, nunca lo estuvimos. Las declaraciones de ex-astronautas que hemos comentado en este canal así lo prueban. De los distintos programas espaciales, el 90% de lo descubierto fue ocultado y aún sigue así. Solo algunos informes, videos e imágenes son publicados de manera extraoficial, las que pudimos mostrar, aún no refutados ni aceptados, pero que contienen una verdad que ya no se puede ocultar. Sumado a las declaraciones de íconos del programa espacial Apolo, nos dan una pauta de que el encubrimiento es grande, absoluto e histórico, ya que incluye eventos o hechos acaecidos también en la Tierra a lo largo de todas las épocas y en distintos lugares famosos por avistamientos ovnis, crash y posibles contactos alienígenas de manera casual o acordada, y con consecuencias muy graves para aquellos testigos que decidieron hablar o divulgarlo. De eso habló Edgar Mitchell en 2009, declarando ante la prensa lo que otros ya habían afirmado, que la vida extraterrestre o alienígena siempre ha existido y que eventos que sucedieron en nuestro planeta también fueron encubiertos por el gobierno norteamericano de lo que él fue testigo. Edgar Mitchell y su testimonio apabullante. Esto es Contacto con la Ciencia, programa de divulgación. Participó en la misión Apolo 14 y aseguró que los alienígenas existen y que el gobierno estadounidense oculta información sobre ovnis. Se trata de Edgar Dean Mitchell, sexto hombre en pisar la Luna en 1971, y en la conferencia X, dedicada a la vida extraterrestre, afirmó que intentó investigar el incidente Roswell, aquel supuesto choque de una nave extraterrestre en la localidad del mismo nombre en Nuevo México, en junio de 1947, pero que sus averiguaciones habían sido frustradas por las autoridades militares. El ex-astronauta había llevado personalmente el tema ante el Pentágono, pero que cuando parecía que iban a acceder a los informes, toda la investigación se vino abajo. Además, sostuvo que las autoridades militares silenciaron a los vecinos de la zona. No estamos solos, afirmó. Nuestro destino es terminar formando parte de una comunidad planetaria. Tenemos que estar dispuestos a ir más allá de nuestro planeta y de nuestro sistema solar para averiguar lo que está ocurriendo realmente allí afuera. A 4 años de su fallecimiento y ante los testimonios de otros afirmando que la vida alienígena no solo existe entre nosotros, sino más allá en el espacio, su testimonio cobra mayor actualidad. Esto fue lo que dijo.
Thank you very much for being here. My story with regard to the disclosure process is very simple. I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, the site of the first UFO crash, the alleged UFO crash. And my story is as a result of growing up there. I was a senior in high school, just going into my senior year in 1947, when on one day the Roswell Record announced that an alien craft had crashed, and the next day changed that story and said no, the Air Force said that was a weather balloon. And since I was on my way to college and more interested in those things, I didn't pay much attention to it at that point in time. However, my family was in the agribusiness. My grandfather was a cattle buyer and sold registered Hereford bulls to the ranchers in the area, knew everybody in the area, and the Pecos Valley and beyond, sold cattle into Arizona, western Texas, and was affectionately known as Bull Mitchell in those parts. And so it was not unsurprising to me later on that the lore of the area, of our friends and the people in Roswell, including the Sheriff's Department, and a military friend of ours, a major, who has also turned out to be a friend of Jesse Marcel, who was the first Air Force officer on the site of the crash. And this Air Force officer was in administration. He was not really involved, but he eventually told me his story, and that's how I became involved. So after my Apollo flight, I did very little. I knew nothing but the lore of the region up until that point. But after my Apollo flight, when I was back in the area and visiting relatives and friends, some of the people in the area who had been involved, what I call the old timers, who were involved in the 1940s, 1947, and subsequent with the Roswell crash, and people like in the sheriff's department who had been to the crash site and were supervising traffic. My friend and friend of our family, the major, who was an office mate of in the administrative function at Walker Air Force Base. These folks, because they had been shushed and told not to talk about their experience by military authority in those days, and on dire consequence if they did, felt that here in the 70s, many, many years later, that they didn't want to go to the grave with their story. They wanted to tell somebody reliable. And being a local boy, and having been to the moon, they considered me reliable enough to whisper in my ear their particular story and their association with the Roswell crash, including the family of the undertaker who provided coffins for the alleged alien victims, and others on site who had been involved or knew the story. And of course, eventually I ran into Jesse Marcel Jr., the son of the Jesse Marcel, who was the first military officer on the site, and knew his story, and knew his story well, and we became friends in later years in this disclosure movement. And at some point, about 10 years ago, and I can't remember what date it was right now, when the disclosure movement was going strongly, I came here to Washington with a Navy commander by the name of Will Miller and Dr. Stephen Greer, and we were able to get an appointment at the Pentagon to talk about what we knew, or what we allegedly knew, what we thought we knew, and went and told our story. And the powers that be at the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff listened to our story and said, the Admiral said, well, I don't know that story. I don't know that that's true, but I will find out. So we departed, went on our way, and subsequently learned through Dr. Greer and through Will Miller, and that those stories have been confirmed, and that the Admiral had been denied access when he tried to get into the inner workings of that process. And we had confirmation of that, although that Admiral now denies the fact that this is the fact. So, my story is essentially...
La NASA, que ya sabemos desde un principio, siempre tuvo participación militar y de inteligencia. Solo muestra una parte de sus logros, la parte inocente, que no afecta a sus intereses y a sus miedos. Avances e investigaciones no comprometedoras, en tanto que lo que complica sus bases lo ocultan, como también lo demostramos. Un ocultamiento que complica aún más la necesidad imperiosa del ser humano por conocer aquellos hechos que nos permitiría evolucionar tecnológicamente, beneficiándonos de manera global. Y ahí estamos, intentando lograr saber más sobre las cosas que nos rodean, investigando y divulgando lo que otros no se atreven. Un riesgo muy alto para un fin tan noble, saber más sobre nosotros mismos y nuestro origen. Tan simple como eso. Esto fue Contacto con la Ciencia, programa de divulgación. Dale like y suscríbete.